We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
George Orwell wrote the great novel 1984 and published it in 1949. Many persons have compared this period of time as a transition to tyranny. With careful scrutiny, will we find they are not far from the truth? Here's a brief homage to 1984 set in 2084.
It was the dead of winter, and although Carl Johnson wanted to check the time, he would have had to remove one of his hands from his pocket to open the panel on his overcoat to access his Z-phone, and it was way too cold for that. The hallway smelt of burnt soybeans, and at one end a colored poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It was an enormous face outlined with memorably orange-hued hair, an older face, but very vibrant, still somewhat sardonic and condemning in its attitude, like it was laughing at you but subtly. It was indeed one of those hologram posters that could pick up retinal signals and it could follow you everywhere. It was totally customized for each citizen, and the flickering smile could open quite wide from time to time, but then it could downturn to a frightful frown. Such was the omnipresent image of the founder. Although he was never seen in person, it was said that he was over 150 years old and often appeared on holo screens, dynamic and well. Johnson made for the stairs. The elevator had been broken for ages. The only elevator he knew of was in his office. Johnson finally reached his floor. He stared at the image in the corner of the hallway. "To protect you, I must be everywhere," the caption beneath it ran. On the other posters, the caption was different. "The founder's love is everywhere." When he got into his room, he looked outside from the corner and saw an orange surveyor copter from Homeland Maintenance dart between several buildings, undoubtedly checking several people's windows. A tricky maneuver, since the distance between the two buildings could barely accommodate the size of the surveillance craft. But that was the kind of maneuver these pilots were trained for. Behind Johnson, from the holoscreen dominating his front room, he could hear some anonymous narrator babbling about the need for another austerity campaign, as though the meager rations the common worker would have to surrender could somehow save his life and the life of his family, owing to the dispersal of some extra tax dollars taken by the government for his defense. Yes, according to the narrator, these tax dollars would categorically repel future attacks from the Red Front militants. What a ridiculous lie, Johnson thought, though he dared not even think too loudly. According to the news, these Red Front militants always made a very big threat, but never actually attacked anyway. The money probably went somewhere, but not to any kind of defense unit, because who needs to defend against militants who never attack anyone, and maybe don't even exist? Now he pulled out his Z-phone. He knew then that the giant holoscreens in his office and thousands of others could access his ugly small apartment whenever he needed. And now he knew he was not only being surveyed by the little camera in his phone, but the sophisticated apparatus in the holoscreen on the wall. There were tiny holes in its vision in certain areas of the room. Most people wouldn't know that, but despite his role as a transcriptionist, Johnson was trained originally as a VR engineer. By virtue of his training, he found a place or two where he could write in his diary without any scrutiny whatsoever. But aside from tiny spaces in his apartment, there probably was universal surveillance. That's the end of this opening of Salvo to 2084, a novel that will never be written. But I recall this one sentence from the original novel, 1984, where it says, "You had to live from a habit that became instinct, and the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every movement scrutinized."